It was a Wednesday afternoon in early May 1993 in the quiet suburban town of West Memphis, Arkansas. The kind of town where children still rode bikes after school and everyone knew everyone else. The day was warm, the air heavy with the smell of summer coming early. On that day, 3 8-year-old boys, Christopher Byers, Michael Moore and Stevie Branch, left their homes after school to play in a patch of woods behind their neighborhood, a place the locals called Robin Hood Hills. It was a familiar playground of dirt trails, small creeks and tree forts, where the kids spent countless afternoons pretending to be adventurers, soldiers or heroes. But this time the boys didn't come back. When dusk settled and dinner time passed, panic began to stir among their families. Christopher's stepfather, John Mark Byers, grew worried when his son didn't answer his calls. Stevie's mother, Pam Hobbs, started calling around the neighborhood. By nightfall, the worry spread like a current through the small community. Parents grabbed flashlights, police officers were called, and neighbors combed through the streets and woods, shouting the boys' names. No one wanted to believe that something truly bad could happen here. West Memphis was a quiet place until that night. The search continued through the dark, but there was no sign of the boys. The next morning, on May 6, 1993, the search resumed under a rising sun and growing fear. Just after 1:45 p.m., a police officer spotted something odd in a drainage ditch near Robin Hood Hills, a small sneaker floating just above the water's surface. Moments later, the discovery that would shake the town, the state, and eventually the nation was made. The bodies of Christopher, Michael, and Stevie were found submerged in a shallow creek, naked, bound hand to foot with their own shoelaces, bruised, beaten, and in one case, mutilated. The water ran red with mud and horror. The news spread faster than wildfire, and within hours, West Memphis became a scene of chaos, grief, and disbelief. People gathered at the edges of the woods, crying and praying as police cars flashed red and blue. The images seared themselves into the town's memory. 3 children, all 8 years old, brutally murdered. To everyone it felt like evil had entered their town. But what kind of evil? And who could do something so monstrous? These questions would consume West Memphis, and lead to one of the most controversial criminal cases in American history. In the first days of the investigation, the police were overwhelmed. There were no clear suspects, no witnesses, no blood trail, and very little physical evidence that pointed to anyone. But the brutality of the crime, the bindings, the nudity, the mutilation, gave rise to a theory that quickly took hold. This was not just murder, it was ritual. It was satanic. It was evil in human form. At the time, America was deep in what was known as the Satanic Panic, a cultural fear that imagined devil worshippers hiding in every shadow, performing dark rituals, sacrificing animals, and now, perhaps, children. Newspapers and television shows fueled the paranoia, and in that climate, fear replaced facts faster than anyone could keep up with. The police began asking around about anyone in town who might be involved in the occult, anyone who dressed in black, listened to heavy metal, or seemed strange. Before long, their attention turned to a 17-year-old high school dropout named Damien Echols. He wore black trench coats, had long dark hair, and listened to bands like Metallica and Black Sabbath. He read books on Wicca and Eastern mysticism, wrote poetry, and kept mostly to himself. In the eyes of many in West Memphis, he was the embodiment of everything they feared. Along with him, the police identified 2 friends. Jason Baldwin, just 16, quiet and polite, a good student who loved drawing, and Jessie Misskelley Jr., 17, a boy with a low IQ and a simple way of seeing the world. They were outsiders, and that, in a town gripped by fear, was enough to make them targets. Detectives questioned Jessie first. On June 3, 1993, he was brought into the police station. He was interrogated for nearly 12 hours straight, without a lawyer, without his parents, and with officers feeding him details, pressuring him to talk. Jessie's IQ was only 72, a level considered borderline intellectually disabled. Under stress, fear, and confusion, he began to tell them what they wanted to hear. He repeated pieces of information they had suggested, mixed with his own guesses and mistakes. He said that Damien and Jason were with him in the woods, that they tied the boys up, hurt them, and killed them. But his timeline didn't match. He said it happened at noon when in reality the boys were still in school. He said the kids were tied with rope when it was actually shoelaces. His story changed every time he repeated it. Still, the police had what they needed, a confession. With Jessie's statement, they arrested all 3 teenagers. Damien, Jason, and Jessie were charged with 3 counts of capital murder. The town breathed a sigh of relief. The monsters had names now. They were behind bars. Justice, it seemed, was on the way. But beneath the surface something was terribly wrong. The trials began in early 1994. Because Jessie had confessed, he was tried separately from Damien and Jason. His confession, though riddled with errors, became the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. The jury heard the words satanic ritual over and over. They saw pictures of the boys, the bindings, and heard about how the suspects wore black and listened to heavy metal music. Jessie was convicted of 1 count of first-degree murder and 2 counts of second-degree murder. His sentence: life in prison plus 40 years. He was 18 years old. 2 weeks later, Damien Echols and Jason Baldwin went on trial together. The courtroom was packed. The media swarmed the small town. Reporters from across the country came to cover what had now been dubbed the Satanic Murder Case. The prosecution painted Damien as the leader, the dark, charismatic ringleader of a teenage cult that had killed 3 children as part of a ritual. They brought in an occult expert, who testified that the injuries and bindings matched patterns of satanic symbolism. They presented books, drawings, and even the way Damien talked as proof of evil. They used Jason's friendship with him as guilt by association. And they leaned heavily on Jessie's inconsistent confession, even though he wasn't testifying in this trial. The defense fought back. They argued there was no physical evidence linking any of the defendants to the crime scene. No blood, no fingerprints, no DNA. The so-called matching fibers could be found in thousands of homes. The confession was unreliable, they said, a product of coercion and confusion. But in that courtroom, logic didn't stand a chance against fear. The image of 3 young boys, murdered and tied up, loomed over every word. And Damien's black clothes, his pale skin, his calm demeanor, to the jury, it all looked sinister. On March 18, 1994, after just a few hours of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict. Jason Baldwin was found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. Damien Echols was found guilty of 3 counts of capital murder. Jason received life without parole. Damien was sentenced to die by lethal injection. He was 19 years old. The courtroom fell silent as Damien's sentence was read. His mother sobbed. Jason stared at the floor. Outside, television cameras caught the cheers of some townspeople who believed justice had been served. But others, a small handful, walked away uneasy. The evidence didn't fit. The story didn't make sense. Something felt wrong. As the months turned into years, the 3 young men disappeared from the public eye, locked behind walls, their lives frozen in time. Damien sat on death row, isolated in a tiny cell for 23 hours a day. Jason and Jessie served their sentences in the general prison population. The world moved on, but whispers of doubt began to grow louder. Some journalists began digging through court transcripts and police reports. They found inconsistencies, contradictions, and mistakes. Jessie's confession didn't match the crime scene. Witnesses had changed their stories. Forensic evidence was questionable at best. And more disturbingly, rumors of juror misconduct began to surface. Jurors who had discussed evidence before deliberations or had been influenced by media coverage. Then, in 1996, something happened that reignited the case and brought it back into the spotlight. HBO released a documentary titled Paradise Lost: The Child Murders at Robin Hood Hills. It featured real footage from the trials, police interviews, and behind-the-scenes moments. What it revealed shocked viewers around the world. The film didn't just tell the story of the murders, it exposed the flaws, the hysteria, and the absence of real evidence. The documentary questioned everything people thought they knew about the case and painted a haunting picture of injustice in small-town America. Suddenly, the West Memphis Three were no longer just convicted killers. They were symbols, possibly innocent boys destroyed by fear, prejudice, and a broken system. The film sparked outrage and sympathy. Supporters began organizing petitions and fundraising campaigns to reopen the case. Musicians, actors, and activists spoke out publicly, demanding a retrial. But the wheels of justice moved slowly, and the state of Arkansas stood by its convictions. Still, something had shifted. The world was beginning to see the cracks. The story that once seemed so simple, evil teenagers killing innocent children, now seemed twisted and uncertain. If these 3 weren't guilty, then the real killer was still out there. And the longer the truth stayed buried, the harder it would be to find. By the late 1990s, the case had transformed from a local tragedy into a national question. How could 3 young men be condemned to die or spend their lives in prison with no solid evidence? How could a community's fear blind it so completely? And how could the justice system fail so profoundly? For Damien, Jason, and Jessie there was no easy answer. Only time, silence, and hope. In the darkness of prison cells they held on to one thing: their truth. They didn't kill those boys. And someday, somehow, the world would know it. The years dragged on. Damien spent his days reading, writing, and meditating to keep his mind alive. He began corresponding with people on the outside, strangers who believed in him. One of them, Lori Davis, would later become his wife and the driving force behind the fight to free him. Jason kept to himself, drawing and studying, determined not to let bitterness consume him. Jessie, lost in confusion and guilt, struggled to understand how his words had helped send his friends to prison. And outside those walls, the fight for their freedom was just beginning.